Yeah, so he hooked a brother up, right? Gave me some 20-ounce Diet Cokes. No, 24-ounce Diet Cokes. The big ones, the big guns. So I just, man, he knows who he is. I very much appreciate it. And we'll eventually get to meet up because he does run 81 a lot. I don't run it as much as I was earlier when I was at Bowman, but I still am out there. So anyway, so I wanted to talk about, and I said I would talk about this, but there have been a number of things that have kind of come out from the government that involve trucking. And one of them is the English language requirement. And the thing, and it's kind of funny because, like, I guess Arkansas and maybe Oklahoma had started trying to enforce that rule. And then the federal government was like, yeah, we're not gonna, because I guess FMCSA back in 2016 maybe said, hey, we just don't really think this is that big of a deal, even though it is a rule. Maybe you want to focus your efforts on other things. And and I wasn't even in trucking in 2016, so it certainly didn't come across my desk, if you know what I'm saying. So anyway, the federal government's like, yeah, we're no longer, we're changing that guidance, okay? But somebody asked me about it, and then I was like, okay, so what's the enforcement mechanism? Because I'll be candid with you, and I'm not trying to be a snob. It's just, my mom, who did not even have a high school diploma, my mom quit school in 8th grade to go to work, like, during the Depression, okay? But my mom, and I'm telling you about that about my mom for this reason. My mom was always on my brother and I about our grammar and our diction. And she would constantly correct our what we said. And she was demanding in that regard. And then when I was in high school, I had really good English teachers. Back when I was a kid, I had teachers that they were just, I say just school teachers, but they had gone to like Ivy League schools, like Dartmouth and Cornell and stuff, not Harvard. I don't think there was any teachers, but I don't know, there might have been. But, that was not unusual. And a lot of them went to state teacher colleges or whatever, but I seriously had like just teachers teaching high school subjects that went to Ivy League schools. Well, anyway, so I had a lot of demanding teachers, and then lo and behold, I start taking college classes, and I take a lot of English classes. I end up getting a law degree. And so language and spelling and punctuation and syntax and all of those things, grammar, are really, like, was my stock in trade, right? Like the worst thing a lawyer can do is have, like, write a legal brief that looks like an 11th grader did it. It totally detracts from it, and it is a way to judge people's professionalism and competence, etc. So anyway, I say all that because I meet a lot of people who, I'm not joking, can barely form a sentence. And when I say that, I am not joking. I mean, they can speak English, they can communicate, but they don't communicate with any indicia, there's the word of the day, indicia, that they ever took like a high school English class. And, lots of studies have shown that adult Americans can't even, do 5th grade work. Okay, so with that as the predicate, with that as the premise, right, is, how are we going to test somebody's ability to speak English. Now, I know that like reading road signs is part of that, but I'm not sure that a lot of people that were born in the U.S. and have never spoken any language other than English can read everything. I mean, I read one time, and this is not a slam on him, but this will just give you an idea. I read about a guy who had been a trucker, a local truck driver, delivery driver in New York City, and he was illiterate. And he was like in his 60s, and he was just learning to read. And I'm sure that was way before the rules. That's back when people had like a chauffeur's license. But what that is evidence of is that people can do this job probably with an incredibly low command of the English language. I'm not saying they can't communicate, but everything else. And so my question is, how is it that you're going to test for this? How do you enforce this? And I don't know the answer, but here's what I do know. I could do better on the English SAT than almost any state trooper in America. Not saying every state trooper. There's some smart guys in law enforcement. But let's be honest, right? Some local yokels, some county mounties, and you're like, man, they're brothers, the undersheriff or whatever. We all know how that goes. So my question is, how do we enforce this? And then another person talked to me. They mentioned the program that, again, I was oblivious to this, but there's a program where I guess Haitian people came over and were given like a fast track to become truck drivers. And he was like, that shouldn't be the case. They should, and the government has talked about, getting rid of non-domiciled truck drivers. And, and when I was at GP Transco, there were dudes that would come over to the States from like the Balkan states. So if you're keeping score at home, the Balkan states like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, those are the Balkan states. They're on a Baltic Sea. So there's your little geography lesson for today. But they would come over and they would drive for like 9.5 or 10 months a year. And then the rest of the time they would go home. And they would leave. They owned a truck here in the United States. They were under contract to GP Transco. And I never really talked to those guys. They kind of kept to themselves. They just did their own thing. And they drove their trucks for GP. And as independent contractors, then they went home for, and usually they went home like the beginning of December and came back like in February or something. So they were home for all the holidays. And I think like if they are, like if they're Orthodox or even in some Christian sects in Europe, the Christmas holidays last longer. So anyway, but again, I said to this person, okay, well, what's the enforcement mechanism? Because, we can't even get like state troopers to like pull somebody over, a truck over that is running at 2 a.m. with no lights on. And the reason I say that is I've seen it. I came up behind a truck. This was when I guess maybe I was I don't know if I was at Bowman, but anyway, I was on I-81. I remember that distinctly because I was down by Roanoke. And I come upon this truck, but I will say this, it wasn't a semi, it was a straight truck. 26,000 GVW truck. I come up on it and, I realize this dude has no lights on. He has like a couple of, it was about as bright as a flashlight in the front. He's got no lights on. I get up to him and, but I'm going up and down hills, so I'm not catching him like super fast. Anyway, a state trooper goes by me, a Virginia state trooper. And we're right by that way station on southbound 81. Virginia state trooper goes by. I'm like, this dude's getting pulled over. Nope. Trooper went right by him. And you say, well, why is that? Well, I think the answer is, and maybe if there's state troopers out there, you almost never, like the state of Iowa, their DOT will put stuff out on social media, but almost never do you see, driver of Amazon, contractor truck given 3 citations and put out of service. You don't see that on the news. But man, if they bust somebody with like 128 pounds of meth and $4,000 in unmarked 10s and 20s in a gym bag, that's all over the news. There'll be a bunch of cops standing around, or maybe they're drug sniffing dog, and they'll have the emblem of the agency that they're from, and they'll have all the drugs stacked up on a table, and any guns and any money and all that stuff, right? Well, I think that's because that's what interests them. They don't really give a crap. Yeah, there are DOT officers, but by and large work days, because I hardly ever see a DOT officer. I'll see state troopers at night, but hold on. All right, I'll edit that out. But I see state troopers at night, but even in a lot of places, I don't even see a lot of state troopers at night. And I think it's because it's all about perception, right? Like they show up when the most people will see them. They're looking to arrest or enforce laws against people that are doing things that they think the public will care about. The public generally does not care if an 18-wheeler is going down the road with 5 tires underinflated. The public doesn't care if somebody doesn't speak English and is driving a truck, as long as that truck doesn't run into them. They don't care if you have a medical card. Most of the motoring public doesn't know you need a medical card. They don't, they probably know there's this commercial driver's license, but they don't know anything beyond that, and they don't care. All they care about is, I'm going from A to B, I don't want a truck to hit me. And all these things that we could be enforcing, like I've talked about Canadian trucks. I saw a truck, it's kind of funny because I saw, I did a video about the Canadian trucks, and somebody was like, oh, well, the reason you see all those Canadian trucks at the Loves in Bath is because that's the first good truck stop that they can get to when they come over the border from Canada. Well, first of all, if they come across the Ambassador Bridge in Niagara Falls, that's not true. There are truck stops closer. If they come across the Thousand Islands Bridge into New York, that's not true. There are truck stops that are closer. But here's the thing. The other day I was sitting there, because I go to that truck stop a lot. I saw 2 trucks in a row pull in, and guess where they were from? They were from Canada, yeah. But Surrey, BC. And one of them was a flatbed that was unloaded. And I'm like, why is a truck from Surrey, BC here? Well, yeah, I guess they could have picked something up somewhere in Canada and brought it down to the States. And now maybe they're looking to go back. I don't know. But the idea that, it's just a coincidence that you see all these Canadian trucks in, I don't know, southern Illinois truck stops or wherever. I think there's a lot of things that could be enforced that would candidly take drivers out of the cab of trucks in the United States. And there was an article in Freight Waves where they talked about the English only requirement, or whatever you call it. They actually had I don't know. But that requirement is, it's not really enforced, and it's hard to enforce. How do you stop? Obviously a police officer can stop any commercial vehicle for any reason, anytime. But I just don't really think, and even in the most hardcore anti-immigrant places in America, I don't really think that many police officers want to stop commercial vehicles and administer an English test. Because what are they going to do if they stop me? They're going to realize, man, that was a waste of time, because that guy speaks some English and he can identify road signs. So anyway, that, I often hear people say, oh, there ought to be a law, but laws need enforcement, otherwise they're useless. And I think U.S. trucking companies, by and large, don't give a crap about the laws that are on the books, as long as it doesn't hurt their business. So like the Haitian truck drivers coming over, that wasn't because the Biden administration is a bunch of bleeding heart liberals. It's because business owners asked for it and lobbied Congress and all that stuff, and lobbied the administration and lobbied the Department of Transportation. And same thing, it's probably true that if you went back and looked in 2016, where FMCSA is like, we don't care that much about that rule. It wouldn't surprise me that there were ATA lobbyists, trucking industry lobbyists that were like, do you really, why don't you issue some guidance that says it's not a big deal? That's how stuff happens in our country. So, I get that people want more work and stuff like that, but I think they're looking, if they wanted to make the roads safer, there were a whole bunch of things they could do. And that's what this article in Freightways, I commend the article to you, because it was just like, it just went through all of the different things like I'm talking about. And there were a couple others too, a couple other like initiatives or whatever you want to call them. And it was like, yeah, like, is this really the most important thing we could be doing with our time? And the answer is probably no. So with that, I stopped at the global corporate headquarters of my company on Monday, because, I was kind of a slacker, and at the very last minute, I looked at my black book in my truck, and lo and behold, because I knew the blitz was coming up, lo and behold, my cab card had expired a few days earlier, like on the 30th of April. So I was like, oh, I am a scofflaw. I am running illegally. And I can speak pretty decent English. And I'm not from Haiti, and I'm running illegally. So what do? Like the dutiful truck driver I am, I delivered my load first. Then I went to the global corporate headquarters and got a new cab card. But while I was there, I talked to my driver manager, and he's like, hey, we had a bunch of people come to orientation this week, so Trainee's probably going to call you. And I'm like, why am I hearing this? Why? They're going to probably want you to put somebody on your truck on Wednesday. I'm like, why am I hearing about this 2 days beforehand and not from the training department? And, I kind of knew the answer to that. But So yeah, later on that day, they were like, oh, we got somebody for you to train, but we don't know if they're going to get through orientation. Because candidly, people quit during orientation at my company. Which I know that's true in other places, but I never heard of it as much as at my company. Like, people will quit during their training ride, check ride, or whatever. And so anyway, I was like, yeah, put this guy in my truck, but almost immediately after I was like, yeah, I'm up in New York, I'm on my way south, I was like, I don't want to do this. And that's what I thought. I was like, I cannot believe I just said yes to this. And I don't even know that I said yes to it this week. I said yes to it at a previous date. I just didn't rescind my yes. So anyway, they are like, yeah, this is the guy, and I'm like, okay. So I call him, and I make arrangements to pick him up, and I believe it or not, I can be a hard man, and so I was like, be at the terminal at 0300. Well, so I pulled into the terminal at about 0313, and I told him where to be, and he wasn't there, and I was like, but he walked around, like he came from the outside, but I had told him to be waiting in this one area, and I was like, because I went inside to the night dispatcher, I'm like, hey, have you seen a guy, in here? And they're like, no. And And I was like, hold on. My seat heater is on, and it's really not that cold out. So I'm turning it off. Because my butt's on fire. So anyway, you know, the first thing out of my mouth when he comes around is, I'm like, are you, I don't even know if I said his name, but I was like, you're late. He's like, oh, I was in my car waiting for you. I said, I told you to be in here. I was like, get in the truck. And so we did. But I was like, okay, chill out, give the guy a chance. So it turns out that he's like this really nice guy, and he is a good driver. But I got to share this. I was talking to Lyle on the phone when my trainee was driving, and I was in the front seat. And we don't, you know, it's not a team driving thing. You know, everybody's on duty at all times type of thing. So I was talking to Lyle, and my trainee has been at 2 companies, Swift and Western Express. And he was only at Western Express for 2 months, and he was like, no, I got to get out of here. And it was funny because, you know, I've always said, hey, if a company works for you, you know, like there are people that watch the channel that are at Western, and they want to be at Western. But he was at Western, and he said so he was only there 2 months, but like, I guess they have dash cams, and his camera broke, and they were like, he's like, oh, well, I'll just go to my terminal and get it fixed. And they're like, no, you got to get it fixed where you are. And he was like in Connecticut, and he said he sat around in Connecticut for like 2 weeks. And, you know, he and I were talking later, and I was like, yeah, you know, when companies leave drivers sitting, that's their way of saying, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of time to apply to jobs at other trucking companies. But then then he told me this story about how he finally, after they couldn't get it fixed, he finally did get back to his terminal. And, you know, I did a show about basically not giving notice if it's not in your interest. And he said he didn't know if things were going to work out at Bowman. So he did not quit at Western Express. And but he said then they were kind of blowing up his phone, and then when he realized, okay, this will probably work for me, because he was looking for a job where he could be home more consistently, because he has a newborn. And I totally get it. He and his wife have a 7-month-old, and he wants to see his son. So anyway, he said he got a text from him, and they were like, hey, if you don't come back today, we're gonna file a report saying that you abandoned your truck. And he was like, abandon my truck? It's at the terminal for you guys to fix. Like nobody called him and said, hey, your truck's fixed. They call him and say, you're abandoning your truck if you don't like answer our text messages or whatever. And he basically told them to go pound sand. He's like, my truck be abandoned? It's with you. And they're like, oh, okay. But so then at that point he was like, yeah, I'm out. But he backed well, and I think he just went to, like, things didn't go the way he wanted at Swift, so he went over to Western, and, you know, he's a father, a newborn, he needs a job, right? He just applied to a bunch of places, whoever answered him first, which interestingly is kind of a telltale sign. I've found that the companies that respond the quickest are the ones, like, I swear there's somebody sitting at a desk and they're just like, they got the email from 10th Street pulled up, and the second something comes in, bam, they hit the enter button, you know, or whatever. And this goes back to my days of applying for jobs at, like, when I was first trying to get into trucking. And I am not kidding you, I could not believe how fast CRST responded, because I didn't really know a lot about a lot of these companies, and I was just like throwing stuff out there. I was doing all sorts of mass applications. CRST, I didn't think electrons could move that fast, but I was like, you know, press a button, look at my phone, and bing, I got a message. So anyway, he left Western after 2 months, and he's now here. I hope, but you know, they were like, hey, you know, drive this truck, because I went and parked at Frederick, but that truck needed to go to the shop, and so his car is in Williamsport, Maryland. But he's gonna be, he'll test out on Monday, and I'm sure he'll do fine. He gets it. You know, he's been in trucking a couple of years. He gets it. He understands what's going on. He understands company policies, and he understands the real world. And you know, he didn't complain about anything. He was eager to learn. And oh, by the way, and I should say, he speaks good English. No communication problems. But he's from Haiti. But I will say this: he came over here as a kid. Like, came to the States as a kid. So he's been in the States for, I don't know, 8 years or something. So he came over when he was a teenager. But anyway, you know, I just think that taking people as they come, because you know, I told him the story about the dude who couldn't slide his tandems at Prime. There was like a Haitian dude, and he, you know, I was like, look, I take everybody how they come. I'm not prejudging anybody. And I think that's the interesting thing about all this stuff that's going on now. I think we could get rid of, you know, if, let's say there's 800,000 over-the-road truckers. I think you could get rid of 10% of them by just enforcing, like, the laws about, like, your CDL not being expired, you not being in the clearinghouse, you not being, there's no warrant for your arrest. Because remember the dude that got killed by the cops at the Loves in Virginia? Richie Rich told me there was a warrant out for his arrest in Maryland for a gun charge. Like, but that dude was driving for Swift. Like, and I know, you know, like, maybe that warrant came afterwards, but like, why is a company that big not like sweeping? Because you know, you can set up, you know, with your IT department to sweep public records, and you can find out about people that have an arrest warrant for a weapons charge that are driving your trucks. And there's so many categories, people that can't pass a physical. You know, there's so many categories. There's so many things that you need to do to be a legit truck drive, commercial vehicle operator in the United States, that I don't know that we need to like jump through a lot of hoops to come up with criteria. Now, and hey, if you're checking licenses and you're doing a lot of stops and bringing a lot of people into weigh stations, and oh, by the way, the guy can't speak English, fine. That's okay. You know, put him out of service. But I guarantee that you can find a lot of reasons to put people out of service. And, you know, think about it. If 10% of the over-the-road truckers, if you're an over-the-road trucker, if 10% of them were to vanish and not be allowed to drive, and companies that were hiring these guys, because there are companies that will take people and they're not really paying close attention. Swift. And, you know, like, just enforce it. And then when you find these drivers that don't have a medical card, that don't have a valid CDL, that don't have all this stuff, you know, be like, hey, we're putting him out of service and you guys just got a $5,000 fine because he's your driver. I bet you that would start adding up. I bet you these mega carriers, it would start adding up. And so there's maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer. Just enforce the laws that are on the books. And again, I mean, those laws, like I'm just describing, are really easy to enforce, right? It's just check it. It's a 5-minute check. You don't have to administer a test, right? It's a 5-minute check. And, you know, so anyway, thanks to everybody. I actually enjoyed having a guy in my truck for just 4 days. you know, like one time he was doing some stuff, and I kind of had told him, oh, maybe you want to do it this way, but I didn't really like jump down his throat. I was just like, okay, whatever, he can do it. He's a driver. And then he ended, and I was just like, you know, it's 4 days. It's 4 days, right? There's not a lot of pressure on me, and there's not a lot of pressure on him. And you know, within a few minutes of him driving, I'm like, okay, he kind of knows. He knows how to keep it between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and you know, he knows to slow down for curves and mountains and stuff. I'm good. We're good. And like I said, he was good at backing, and had, you know, we had some confidence building exercises at the Loves in Carlisle, because that place is a dumpster fire to park in. And he was driving that day, and you know, so there you go. But it was all good, and I appreciate him, and I'm like, hey man, you know, I'll see you around campus, because that's the other thing I do like about the account I'm on. You get to see the other drivers pretty frequently in different places. So anyway, thanks for watching. Be safe, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.